You've heard of Cyrus the Great, the liberator of Babylon, the founder of the Persian Empire, the king who freed the Jews. But you haven't heard the real story, because history remembers him as a military genius, but forgets the revolution he started, not just against kings, but against priests. Cyrus didn't just fight empires. He defied the Mobeds, the most powerful priesthood of ancient Iran, the same priesthood we exposed in the last video, the ones who controlled fire, law, and the right to speak in God's name. And Cyrus did the unthinkable. He cut them out. He built a kingdom based on spiritual freedom, not religious hierarchy. And for that, he was erased, not from history, but from meaning. Let's rewind. Before Cyrus, the Median Empire ruled the Iranian plateau. It was a shadow theocracy. The king ruled, but the Mobeds controlled time, fire, and truth. They dictated when wars began, who was clean or unclean, which fire altars were legitimate, and they claimed that only they could interpret divine will. Then came Cyrus, a tribal prince from Anshan, outsider. Half Persian, half Elamite, no priestly blood, no temple allegiance, but something else burned in him. Not ritual, but fire of the original kind. The same fire carried by Abraham. The same rebellion sparked by Zarathustra. And Cyrus knew, if he wanted to change the world, he couldn't just defeat kings. He had to unplug the priesthood. So what did he do? He unified the Persian tribes. He overthrew his Median overlord, Astyages, a puppet of the Mobeds. And instead of putting the Mobeds in charge of his new empire, he sidelined them. He created a new class of advisors, military commanders, scholars, and multicultural governors. He built a state where religion was tolerated, not enforced. This wasn't just tolerance. This was spiritual rebellion. Cyrus issued one of the most radical declarations in ancient history, engraved on what we now call the Cyrus Cylinder. I returned the gods to their sanctuaries. I allowed all peoples to worship in their own ways. I freed the captives and repaired their temples. This wasn't just good PR. It was a direct strike at the Mobeds' monopoly. He took fire out of their hands and gave it back to the people. Now here's what they don't teach. Cyrus's mother may have been linked to Zarathustra's lineage. There are oral traditions, in both Persian and Sufi archives, that suggest she was part of the true firekeepers, the underground community that preserved the original message of the prophet before it was institutionalized. This would explain why Cyrus refused to impose any one religion, treated Jews, Babylonians, and Iranians equally, never built a temple to himself, and most importantly, never declared a priest-king model, even when he could, he remembered. And that memory terrified the priesthood. Because once the fire was decentralized, once the creator was no longer controlled by scribes and rituals, people would wake up. So what did the Mobeds do? They waited. They smiled. They served in silence. And then, after Cyrus's death, they rewrote everything. They rebranded him as a king blessed by their rituals. They inserted his name into their genealogies. They claimed he supported their caste. But if you read closely, in the Qur'an, in Isaiah, in the Cylinder, in Greek records, you'll see something else. Cyrus didn't just liberate people from kings. He liberated them from religious slavery. Cyrus was a threat not because he conquered lands, but because he freed minds, and the priesthood knew. If Cyrus succeeded, the ancient grip of Fire Temple power would collapse forever. So they waited. They smiled in public. They served him loyally. But beneath the surface, they were planning a counterattack, not with armies, but with narrative, because the priesthood understood one eternal truth. Kill a man, and you create a martyr. Control his memory, and you own history. So after Cyrus died, mysteriously in battle, without witnesses, the priesthood began the Great Rewrite. Let's break down how they did it. Step 1. Co-opt his glory. They inserted Cyrus into the Zoroastrian priestly chronicles, not as a rebel against Mobeds, but as a champion of their system. They claimed his victories were due to fire purity, to rituals only they had performed on his behalf. They dressed his memory in priestly robes he never wore in life. They began to say, he won because he obeyed the fire laws, when in truth he had freed fire from law. Step 2. Erase the fire rebellion. They buried the truth about Cyrus's rejection of religious caste. The original Avesta had almost no trace of Cyrus. Why? Because the true Zoroastrians, The underground followers of Zarathustra saw Cyrus as a political liberator, not a ritual hero. But the Sassanid-era priesthood 500 years later resurrected Cyrus's name and rebranded him as a king approved by the caste. They even created false genealogies to tie him to priestly ancestors. And yet the evidence shows the opposite. Cyrus was never initiated into Mobedic ritual. He never submitted to Fire Temple authority. He never enforced Zoroastrianism, not even in his own court. And the Jews he freed? They never mentioned fire temples. They saw Cyrus as an instrument of the one God, not of any religion. Even the Qur'an calls him Dul Qarnayn, the two-horned one, but never ties him to any priesthood. Instead, it shows him as a man who traveled far, stood with the oppressed, and built a wall against destructive forces. He is not religious. He is righteous. And that's exactly what the priesthood couldn't allow, because a righteous ruler with no need for priests is the death of every sacred hierarchy. Step 3. Replace him with Darius. After Cyrus's death, a new figure rose, Darius worse. He built massive temples. He enforced priestly ritual. He re-centralized the Mobeds. He made the Zoroastrian caste a state religion. In simple terms, Darius took Cyrus's fire rebellion and flipped it. He built the fire back into a system of control. He established the Behistun inscription, one of the most propagandistic stone monuments ever carved, to declare his divine legitimacy, connect himself to Ahura Mazda, and validate priest-backed kingship. From there, the template was set. The priestly castes came back in full power. Fire temples became state-controlled. Truth was only what the Mobeds approved. Cyrus's vision of open fire, open truth, open God was reversed into sealed rituals, elite interpretation, and sacred control. And over time, the memory of his rebellion was buried under layers of empire, myth, and religious branding. But some clues survived, because the truth never dies. It just waits. In Sufi writings, Cyrus is remembered not as a king, but as a servant of the unseen, a man who obeyed divine order, not priestly systems. In Jewish tradition, he is the only non-Jew ever called God's anointed, not because of ritual, because of justice. And in the Qur'an, he's given no priest, no religion, only action, only power balanced by mercy. So now ask yourself, why would three major traditions, Islam, Judaism, and mystic Persia, all honor this man, while institutional priesthoods pretend he was theirs, because they couldn't delete him, but they could rebrand him? Now let's talk about the part they truly fear. Not what Cyrus did, but what he left behind. Because Cyrus didn't just build roads and empires. He left a spiritual blueprint, one that has resurfaced in every age of awakening. Let me explain. What did Cyrus actually prove? That it's possible to build a world power without needing a centralized religion. That truth can thrive without a priesthood middleman. That God can guide a king without ritual, caste, or robes. This was the original fire rebellion. And it terrified the global priest class so deeply, they've been trying to bury it for 2,500 years. But it won't stay buried, because Cyrus's true system, the one you never learned in school, was built on 4 spiritual laws. Let's expose them. Law 1, power must serve all faiths or none. Cyrus was the first ruler to declare freedom of religion in a formal edict, not as a PR move, as a cosmic principle. He wasn't interested in which god you named. He cared whether you ruled with justice, whether you honored contracts, whether you uplifted the weak. In other words, he judged by light, not label. Law 2. Divine order is not owned by priests. Cyrus's court had no chief priest. No temple was built for his personal worship. He didn't enforce religious codes from above. Instead, he believed in sacred order embedded in reality, justice, harmony, reciprocity. He restored temples of other faiths, but never created a theocracy for himself. This is unheard of in ancient world history, and it points to a higher understanding that the divine doesn't belong to any one structure. Law 3. The fire belongs to the people. The Mobeds had monopolized fire. Only they could tend the sacred flame. Only they could speak in its presence. Cyrus reversed that without even needing to say it. By removing their control over governance, he returned the flame to the world. After his conquests, fire temples did not spread. But justice did. Infrastructure did. Peace did. Because the real flame wasn't in a temple. It was in the conduct of righteous leadership. Law 4. prophets and kings must remain separate. Cyrus respected the divine, but refused to pretend he was divine. He never claimed revelation. He never declared himself God-king as the pharaohs did. He never wore priestly regalia like Darius. This separation of sacred and political roles prevented absolute corruption, and that was the key to his success. And also the reason he had to be rebranded or forgotten. So what's the legacy of Cyrus today? It's not just in history books. It's encoded in every spiritual awakening movement that resists institutional control. It's in the mystics who say God needs no building. It's in the rebels who reject corporate religion. It's in the thinkers who say justice is above dogma. But here's the part that matters most. Cyrus's rebellion didn't end. It was paused. Because the priesthood adapted. They left fire temples behind and built universities, churches, secret orders, and tech platforms. And today, they control spiritual access through digital rituals, algorithmic priests, and corporate scripture. They replace temples with timelines, scriptures with terms of service, initiation with influence. It's not robes and incense anymore. It's status, branding, and blue check marks. But the game is the same. Keep the fire locked away. Keep you from remembering who you are. And that's why the memory of Cyrus matters now more than ever. Because his model still works. Decentralized power, spiritual freedom, justice before theology, fire without priests. It's the one formula the elite can't control. Because it lights a fire they can't manage. A fire in the conscience, not the temple. A fire in the people, not the palace. A fire that remembers God never needed middlemen, just honest men. And Cyrus was that man. They called him great, but not because of what he conquered, because of what he refused to become.